An era of incredible tension and intense paranoia.
Just the names and addresses.
When the entire world seemed on the constant brink of destruction. This is 5 things you don't know about the Cold War.
Flight 611, we got him moving. We're going back to buttoned up.
The United States and Soviet Union watched one another relentlessly throughout the entire Cold War. And anything that seemed even the slightest bit out of the ordinary was considered potentially vital information. So when a group of Soviet spies using satellite imagery spotted many top US military officials routinely entering and exiting a small building at the center of the Pentagon, they immediately assumed the heavily trafficked area was the entrance to a top secret bunker. This assumption led the Soviets to point 2 nuclear weapons at the site. Only the funny thing is, the little building wasn't a bunker at all. It was actually a hot dog stand. And the people coming and going were doing nothing more than getting lunch.
Rev 2 directly in front of us, sir. Let's be advised, Rev directly to our front right now.
The constant desire to stay one step ahead of the enemy in intelligence gathering led the CIA to take some pretty extreme measures during the 1960s. And one of their most outlandish plans involved using a regular house cat to snoop on suspected Soviet spies. Codenamed Operation Acoustic Kitty, the CIA transformed the cat into a covert agent by surgically implanting a microphone in its ear canal, embedding a small transmitter at the base of its skull, and hiding a wire antenna in its fur. To test out their new spy, they drove the cat to a city park and released it near 2 men sitting on a bench, hoping to secretly record their conversation. Only, instead of sitting calmly next to the men, the cat darted out into the street and was promptly hit and killed by a passing cab, putting an end to perhaps the most bizarre CIA operation in history.
Nobody from my tracks, we're way back, over.
By the late 1950s, the arms race was in full swing, and as America and the USSR attempted to one-up each other, the US Air Force came up with a pretty intense plan to prove American nuclear dominance. Called Project A119.
Liftoff, the clock has started.
The idea was to launch a missile carrying a nuclear device to the moon, where it'd be detonated and create a mushroom cloud so large it could be seen on Earth. Famed scientist Carl Sagan was even hired to help calculate the explosion's visibility. Thankfully, Project A119 was ultimately canceled due to concerns over contaminating the moon with radioactive material.
They're gonna fire a 3rd rocket, sir.
In August 1945, just months after hostilities ended in Europe, a group of Soviet school children presented U.S. Ambassador Abel Archer with a wooden carving of the Great Seal of the United States. A gesture of friendship between the 2 World War II allies, the gift was hung in the ambassador's study in his Moscow residence. Nearly 7 years later, in 1952, U.S. security personnel conducting a surveillance countermeasures sweep detected a small listening device implanted within the seal.
Here is the clandestine listening device.
The Soviets had actually been using the plaque to spy on the Americans.
Get really close to him. Give me an up, and we'll tell you to hold it up. Over.
On November 2nd, 1983, NATO forces began a large-scale military training exercise called Abel Archer. Spanning much of Western Europe, this realistic drill included a period of simulated conflict escalation that culminated in a fake nuclear attack.
Evacuate immediately.
But while the exercise was really nothing more than training, its timing wasn't exactly the best. Deteriorated Soviet-American relations, coupled with the fact that the exercise coincided with the U.S. deployment of several Pershing II missiles to Europe, led many Soviet leaders to believe that Abel Archer was really a ruse to hide preparations for a real nuclear first strike by the United States. And according to recently declassified documents, the Soviets responded by transporting nuclear weapons from storage sites to delivery units, and by grounding all unnecessary flights in order to have as many aircraft as possible ready for a retaliatory attack. In short, they acted as if nuclear war was imminent. Thankfully, the threat of annihilation ended on November 11th, when the 10-day-long exercise concluded. Today, many historians believe that Abel Archer 83 was the closest the world has come to nuclear war since the Cuban Missile Crisis. The phrase Cold War has been commonly used for decades to describe the confrontation between the Soviet Union and Western powers such as the United States. But do you know who first used the phrase in relation to this conflict? If so, post your answer below or reach out to us through Twitter using hashtag 5thingsyouDon'tKnow.